So maybe you're interested in taking the bus, but let's face it, the buses in your city are absolute shit.
Maybe your city's bus system feels like a mystery, or it's something that doesn't even feel worth your time to even look into, especially if you already have other means of getting around. Today, I'm challenging you to ignore that perfectly logical voice in your head that's been telling you to avoid the bus. I'm going to walk you through some tips and tricks that I've discovered from taking the bus here in Oklahoma, which is certifiably a place with terrible bus service.
When I went to Oklahoma City, I knew that I would have to get to the airport at some point to get home, but Oklahoma City does not actually have a bus to the airport. And so I booked myself a hotel out near the airport that's on the bus system, so I could take a bus out to the hotel, and then the hotel had a free airport shuttle. So I purposely stayed in a worse area just to be able to get to the airport without having to shell out a ton of money for an Uber.
If you support good public transportation in theory, yet you rarely use the public transportation that's available in your home city, this video is for you. I want to get you onto a shitty bus within the next week. Hopefully, I can even convince you to start using shitty public transportation regularly.
Now you might think that's a weird goal for a YouTube video, and you're not wrong, which is why at the end of this, I'll be fully explaining my motivation behind all this. All I ask for now is that you simply hear me out.
Feel free to come back and reference this video while planning out your routes. Share it with friends who may be both curious and reluctant about using public transportation.
And without further ado, welcome to eryngo.urbanism.
Tip 1. Focus on a few routes first. Before you can get on a bus, you need to know where the buses even go. Bus routes are much less visible than any other mode of transportation, and sometimes they'll snake through your city in completely counterintuitive ways. It's really hard to keep track of where all of these routes go, especially if you've never used them before.
But I'm here to tell you that you don't really even need to.
My advice is to start by focusing only on the routes that pass near places you often visit. This could be your home, work, school, favorite coffee shop, or so on. Figure out where all these routes go and what other destinations fall along them. These single route trips are your best bet as you're first getting used to the bus. And here in a minute, we'll take it just a step further. But first, tip 2, request your stops. Okay, this one's pretty basic, but if you're entirely new to taking the bus, it might not be fully self-explanatory. Most buses will not stop at every bus stop, and this is good. If they did, every bus ride would take forever. But this does have 2 consequences for riders. First of all, when you're standing at a bus stop and you see your bus approaching, make sure to stare the bus driver in the eye and wave. This signals to the driver that you actually want them to stop for you and let you get on the bus.
Good morning.
So the other consequence is that when you're on the bus and you want to get off, you also have to signal that to the driver.
On most buses, there will be a cord near the top of the windows that you can pull, or a button that you can press to request a stop.
So of course you need to know where your stop is, but almost more importantly, you need to know where the stop before yours is so that you can request that they stop at your stop as soon as you pass the previous stop. Does that make sense? Let me just show you. So here's a bus stop. I don't want to get off here, but as soon as we start moving again, I'm gonna pull the request thing because I want to get off at the next stop.
But now, let's go just a bit further. Tip 3, be strategic with your transfers. If you've ever taken a metro system, transferring from one line to another is super common and usually quite easy. Basically, a well-designed frequent urban rail network unlocks the ability to get from each station on the network to every other station on the network in a straightforward and comfortable manner. But when you're navigating a lackluster bus system, this is not a good way to think about it. While an infrequent bus route might intersect with several other infrequent bus routes, that doesn't mean you can easily or comfortably transfer to any of these points.
Basically, if you're transferring from one 60-minute frequency bus to another, your wait time can fluctuate between like 10 seconds and 70 minutes, which to me isn't really something I can count on.
As a general rule, try to avoid transferring onto low-frequency bus routes at all. But wait, that means most transfers are no good.
Unfortunately, yes. But luckily, there may be a couple of decent workarounds if you know where to look. First and foremost, you should check and see if your city has any higher frequency bus routes. I've just walked over to OKC's BRT route, which says it will be here in 6 minutes, which is fantastic. But you can also easily take an infrequent bus as your first leg, where you plan to transfer onto a light rail or metro line if your city's fancy enough to have that kind of thing.
Transferring onto these frequent routes, even from a shitty bus, should always be a fairly decent experience. The only downside with this approach is that your return trip, when you transfer back onto the low frequency route, might still unfortunately leave you stranded at a bus stop for a while. But that brings me to a second trick that will help you improve your transfer experience, which is to get creative with your waiting areas. If you know for a fact that you're gonna have to wait 20 minutes or longer for your bus, don't just stand out on the sidewalk and wait if you can avoid it. Duck into a nearby coffee shop, library, or bookstore. Find some shade in a park or a place to sit.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about that on the return. Right now, let's hop on this BRT and head downtown.
Northwest Expressway.
Good morning.
Watch your step when
The last transfer trick is slightly dependent on your city's bus system design. The trick is to look for hubs. Let me explain. A very common bus system design is called hub and spoke, with most or all of the routes coming together at a central location that's designed to facilitate transfers. In some cities, smaller hubs are located around the outskirts of the system, providing even more opportunities for transfers. Ideally, the bus schedules might even be synchronized.
I am a huge fan of pulse scheduling, where you have one or more, you can do it other places too, hubs where all of the buses come in at the same time and they all depart at the same time, so that people can really easily make transfers between them and then go to whichever place they want to go. So I think that's a way to make infrequent transit actually usable and show that you do actually care about about the scheduling.
But don't count on that. At the very least, these locations usually have a decent amount of infrastructure, possibly including bathrooms, staff, and comfortable places to wait.
Thank you.
Never actually come inside of this building before, but I'm a little surprised there's no seating in here. It's kind of upsetting, but hey, at least it's air conditioned. And there's like 2 benches over in the other space. Not gonna film them because somebody's sitting there, but you got water and snacks.
These hubs certainly aren't perfect, but they should be nicer than standing alone on a narrow sidewalk for an hour. Tip 4, plan your trip in advance.
When I'm going to a new city, I will spend a lot of time looking at the system map and trying to learn how the system works. I think it's very important to be able to look at a city and be able to tell, where will I be able to use transit, where will I be able to go, where will I not be able to go if that ends up being an issue, especially if that map covers frequency. When going to a new city, you can look at that map and you can see, okay, this route's every 15 minutes, I can rely on that, no problem. This route's half hourly, I might need to check a schedule. Or this route runs rush hour only, I can't really rely on that.
As you might have gathered by now, the worst part about riding an infrequent bus is simply waiting around for it to show up. So in order to have the best possible experience, you need to know exactly when the bus is supposed to arrive at the stop where you plan to board. Based on this time, you can determine exactly when you need to head to the bus stop in order to minimize your time waiting at the stop.
So up there is my bus stop, but the bus doesn't come in for another 40 minutes or so. So I think I'm gonna explore some stuff. Doesn't feel like I should be going this way, but I'm going to anyways. Yeah. So you just need to be careful, because while you might think a city bus would probably be late, it's actually kind of worse if it's early, because if I get there right on time, then I'm gonna miss it. Usually a good rule of thumb is to show up at least 5 minutes before the bus is supposed to depart. I've never felt too underdressed to go into a furniture store, but I think that's kind of the situation here. So I'm gonna go hang out somewhere a little more welcoming.
Fares are another thing. I recently did a trip up the West Coast from Mexico to Canada using only local transit, which I know is a completely insane thing to do, that no normal person would ever do. But it did require doing a lot of research into the transit agencies and figuring out the fares. And one thing I did was I made a spreadsheet that had each bus route and what fare it would be and how I would have to pay it. So I could go to the bank and get the right amount of 5s, the right amount of 1s. So figuring out how you can pay for a trip, that's another important aspect. So just doing the research, looking at the website. I'm glad we live in an age where we can look at a transit website on the internet and at least try to figure out how a bad system works.
This is really why regular, repeated trips are the best candidate for becoming bus trips. You can easily learn what time the bus you need to catch will arrive every day, and then all you need to do is make a regular routine to arrive at the stop by that time.
Can I just get a 12-ounce cold brew, please?
Yes. Say it again.
12-ounce cold brew, please.
You want any cream in that?
No thanks.
Think about destinations you want to visit weekly or even daily at a predictable time. These trips can easily be planned out once and repeated over and over and over again. Tip 5. Look for live feedback. Fancy bus stops will have screens that tell you how long you'll need to wait for each bus to arrive. But even at a rudimentary bus stop on an infrequent route, you can often still receive similar feedback if your city provides live bus location tracking available to view online. Think of this as like a marauder's map of where all the buses in the city are located at any given time. This can seriously help ease your anxiety if you're waiting at a stop for a while past the scheduled time and no bus has arrived yet. With the live map, you can physically see that they're just around the corner, still headed your way. Just note that even when a city does usually provide this, sometimes an individual bus will have the tracking turned off for one reason or another. I find this seriously annoying, but if there's supposed to be a bus arriving soon and the map doesn't show you one anywhere nearby, hopefully the tracking is just turned off on the bus you're trying to catch. But who knows, maybe the bus just doesn't even exist, and you'll have to be patient and hope for the best. Tip 6. Keep an eye out for service changes. Buses are often applauded for their flexibility, since they can easily be rerouted based on demand, road closures, or to improve their efficiency. This flexibility is fantastic news for transportation planners, but it's also one of the most frustrating and discouraging roadblocks a bus rider can encounter. Let's say you plan out a trip, such as a commute to work, and you've been doing the same trip for months without any issues. Suddenly, you might show up one day and the route will simply be different than it was the day before, and you'll just have to deal with the uncertainty that causes. Often these route changes will technically improve the overall bus system on paper, but at the same time, they will almost certainly inconvenience you specifically and make you want to give up and call a taxi or rideshare instead. First of all, I challenge you not to get discouraged when this happens. Sure, it's annoying, but you'll just have to be adaptable. Secondly, I recommend that you try to keep an eye on any communication your city puts out with these kinds of changes so that you'll be prepared ahead of time when it takes place. Unfortunately, sometimes these changes will just happen without any warning, and you'll just have to make adjustments on the fly. When this has happened to me, I just tried to think of this as a tiny, unplanned adventure.
Somebody looked at me like I was crazy in there for filming. So, sorry. To be fair, I filmed myself getting coffee, sitting down, and then immediately leaving. So I probably did look kind of insane.
Tip 7. Talk to the bus drivers. I've genuinely rarely had a bad interaction with a bus driver, and they're usually happy to help you if you have any questions. If you start riding a route frequently, the drivers of that route might even start to recognize you and become another friendly face in your community. They may even try to warn you of an upcoming route change or help you figure out an alternative way to your destination when something unexpected occurs. I've even seen drivers slightly deviate routes or take shortcuts at the request of those on the bus. As a disclaimer, you should never count on them doing anything like this because, of course, they have specific routes and timetables to meet, but it never hurts to politely ask. And of course, always thank the driver when you get to your destination.
Thank you.
So, you may still be wondering, what's the point of all this? If you're not used to taking public transit, I can guess what you might be thinking. That's a lot of hoops to jump through just to get around. Isn't it so much easier to just get into my car and drive where I need to go? And yeah, I actually agree.
Here's where I admit that even I normally use my car to get around anywhere that I go. I'll openly admit that I have the privilege to make that choice, while most people who regularly use shitty public transportation don't have a choice. And while I do hope that some of the tips in this video may be helpful to those who don't have a choice but to take a shitty bus, the real target audience of this video is people like me who, without thinking very much of it, often choose not to use their city's public transportation system.
If that sounds like you and you've made it this far in the video, I would venture to guess that you have had a good experience with public transportation, at least somewhere in the world. Maybe you went on a trip to New York City, or Barcelona, or Milan, and you were amazed by how you really didn't need a car to get anywhere you wanted to go within the city. But now that you're back home, maybe you wish your city had a world-class public transportation system, but today it simply doesn't. It's even hard to imagine a future where it does. So defeated, you just hop back in your car and that's that. But unfortunately, the way our cities make decisions about how to prioritize improvements to public transportation is usually by reacting to the way that people are using the system today. If people don't use the shitty bus routes that they provide, the ridership numbers are low, meaning the city will assume that there's little demand for transit improvement. This is known as the transit death spiral, where bad service becomes even worse over time as less and less people use it, until only those with no other options remain. As a quick note, the people in charge of the federal government right now are attempting to apply this transit death spiral to any number of things like public education, libraries, parks, and so on. And my argument here about transit applies to all of those things as well.
I had this really awful realization recently thinking about Philly's cuts, because that's the place that I'm most familiar with because I went to school there, is that once these cuts happen, I hate to say it, but like for the most part, life goes on and we just forget that these services ever existed, that they used to be better. People just have to deal with slower transit and less frequent transit, and like life goes on and everyone forgets that things used to be way better, and then it's like, well, we can't add service. Like things are just constantly cutting and never coming back, and it's really sad.
Obviously, these death spirals are dumb. Low ridership on a low-frequency bus route, especially one following an otherwise bustling corridor, should signify not that a service should be cut, but rather that it needs to be improved and made more frequent, reliable, comfortable, and convenient before people will be willing to choose to use it.
I saw a really confusing article from the Turnpike Authority where they were talking about how they need to expand the turnpike because there's so many cars, but also there's not enough demand for a train because there's so many cars. Look at all the cars.
And these things always exceed what people think. Like when Virginia added a second train to Norfolk, it doubled the ridership on the line because it was a second train per day. The Borealis up in Minnesota from Chicago to Minneapolis, that has been vastly exceeding its ridership estimates. It's often sold out. When you add trains places, people use them. It really is as simple as if you build it, they will come.
Now, a top-down solution to ending these death spirals is for a community to purposefully invest in public goods. But this takes strong, visionary political leadership, a willingness to spend public funds to actually operate these services effectively, and maybe even a cultural and generational shift among those with the power to make these kinds of decisions. But there's also a bottom-up brute force solution to the transit death spiral that's maybe slightly less glamorous. All we have to do is to simply choose to take the bus more often, even when it's a little bit inconvenient. If enough people do this, we can increase bus ridership numbers, making it very challenging for your city leaders to argue that there is no demand for public transit. Engaging with your city's shitty transit system will also make you more aware of the specific issues it faces, which will help show you how to speak up to your local leaders about what needs to be improved and why. Maybe frequency is a big issue. Late night service? Weekend service? Maybe the routes are just confusing. If you never take the bus, you may generally have an idea that the system sucks, but it's hard to grasp what specific improvements you should be advocating for until you hop on a bus yourself.
I make my videos and I'm lucky that people watch them and kind of get things out of it. You know, what I do is I just show what it's like to ride a system and people kind of realize that things can improve, and I'm very grateful that that's the way that I can contribute to the advocacy scene, because I don't know a ton, but a lot of cities do have transit rider advocacy groups or unions or whatever else. I've done some work with Fifth Square in Philly. which is the one for SEPTA. Boston has Transit Matters. Vancouver has one called Movement that does a lot of really cool work. So I think that that's a good, like, to find that community, because oftentimes too they're having fun as well. Like Movement in Vancouver does all sorts of events and rides and whatnot. Transit Matters did this thing called the Pokey Schleppy Awards, where they had a big party and celebrated the slowest bus routes on the T. And so it was like, it was pointing out this big flaw with the system, but also it was like a fun thing that they did. If you're interested in making transit better, hanging out with other people who also want to make transit better is not a bad thing. And I think that's a good place to go to find that type of community. And you can find an advocacy group in your city. If there isn't one, I think there are other people who want to make transit better. And I think that you have the power to create one. I think it's possible.
I personally think that using shitty, inconvenient public transportation can actually be weirdly fun. Sure, it might be a bit challenging, time-consuming, and even frustrating at times. But it's also a really interesting and unique way to navigate and experience a particular place. It allows you to slow down, to interact with your neighbors that you otherwise would have never met, and to gain a new appreciation for certain parts of your city that you may not otherwise spend much time in outside of a car. For instance, you will most likely get to see some cute dogs out for a walk. Or you could discover your new favorite coffee shop that you simply never had a reason to visit before. I think that a convoluted bus journey with unexpected twists and turns is almost always a lot more enjoyable and interesting than sitting in traffic by yourself. But of course, shitty public transportation is never the end goal. And while a meandering bus ride beats driving any day in my book, what every city deserves is a public transportation system so good that it actually is more convenient than driving. We want our cities to have convenient, frequent, and reliable public transportation that works for everyone, and shouldn't require you to jump through hoops just to use it. In order to achieve this vision of the future, we need to nourish a new generation of community-oriented problem solvers who understand how to collect and analyze precedent from around the world. We need people who are willing to approach big issues head-on without becoming paralyzed by a fear of failure. While I'd like to think this channel is helping to encourage such a radical approach, the place where I learned this myself was on my high school robotics team. If you're curious why I think youth robotics programs of all things are an important part of building stronger communities in the future, you absolutely need to check out this video. And based on the numbers, there's a good chance you haven't seen it yet. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks as always to my patrons. You all are the best.